I'd like to start with a couple questions. Can you raise your hand if you know what digital nomad is? Pretty good, pretty good. About 50% of the audience. Another question is, do you know how many of them there are globally? A little less number of hands. Actually, I was surprised, and I think you will be surprised to learn that there are 35 million of us, people who consider themselves as digital nomads. And our collective GDP is larger than Germany. And this group of people is growing fast, growing rapidly. In 2020, one research was done, and it says that 11 million Americans identified themselves as a digital nomads. And this number was 49% larger than the year before. So who are we? Who are these people? Well, primarily we are high-tech entrepreneurs, investors, professionals, content creators, developers, designers, people with average income between 100,000 and 250,000 US dollars. We are very efficient, because probably we are high-tech centric, but we're also very creative class of people. And most of us, around 75%, hold either progressive or libertarian political views. And despite the fact that most of us come from United States, and some of us come from Europe and in other regions like South America, we are global citizens. We travel freely, we work remotely, we frequently change our residence, and we see the entire planet as our home. We do not associate ourselves with any particular country. Given this global mindset and global presence, as well as quite diverse experience and expertise, on top of this community-centered brain power, and what is the more important, our ability to act collectively, I believe we might be better positioned to address certain global challenges than any centralized organizations. By the way, we also bring quite a lot of benefits and values to specific countries where we travel to or reside in. For example, a great deal of the wealth of Dubai has been produced because Dubai was the best responder, one of the best responders to the digital nomad culture. But interesting enough, no matter how attractive and competitive conditions one or another country can offer to digital nomads, you will not be able to guess and capture the most value from us. Because we have different mindset, we have certain needs and certain pain points which cannot be addressed by a single country without collaboration with a global community of digital nomads. And I'm talking about universal public services like healthcare, education, insurance, which should be available across different jurisdictions and should be provided in a new form of global web-free online services based on decentralized technology. Also quite important to have universal global identity, or let's say point of reference, so we can easily open bank account or get a local cell phone number without having local address or utility bill or any other hassle. Also, the integration of decentralized technology and decentralized finance technology is quite important. Integration with local economy, because we would prefer to pay for local services and even buy local property using cryptocurrencies. And last but not least, digital nomads need quite an innovative form of governance, where we give every member of our community equal voice to participate in decision-making process. And that's why we created for digital nomads something which didn't exist before. A network union called Collaboration Nation. A voluntary joint community that shares values, resources to achieve a common societal vision. The Collaboration Nation will be peer-governed by digital nomad community and will create certain products and services to address their needs. But also we will advocate our common interest in a global scale, and we will create quite unique cross-border governance which will be recognized by national and global institutions. Collaboration Nation consists of three groups of people. One is, of course, its members, solution providers, and execution team. Execution team will receive real-time information about digital nomads' needs, problems, issues, and based on this information, we will build a product roadmap of certain services we will deliver to them. For the next year or this year, we have certain milestones. And the first one, by the end of May, we will complete application process for the first 1,000 founding members of our community. First 1,000 digital nomads. By June this year, we're going to sign up a few governments, which will, of course, will get certain benefits, terms, and special status, to partner with us to run this pilot project. And by the end of this year, we're going to launch the first set of products to address certain needs of our community. What is interesting, the early next year, we plan quite a big Collaboration Nation Global Summit. Most likely it will be in Dubai. So why governments should partner with us? Look, frankly speaking, they trust us more than to any government. Well, because we understand them, because we are them. And this is quite important because they think differently. They don't think in terms of hierarchy, they don't think in terms of centralized authorities, and they live in brief idea of decentralized economy, a decentralized community. And what we are creating in a network union, Collaboration Nation, is a kind of framework and structure which is based on these values and principles. So it will be easy for any government to engage and interact with digital nomads using this infrastructure. So what's the value? Well, basically, in another sense, you guys, governments, will speak their language. So what's the value for the governments? For me, it's quite obvious. Governments will understand their needs better. They will be able to create more relevant products and services using our feedback and our community. And by the way, if local governments has a certain technological solution for digital nomads, they will be able to scale it globally through our Collaboration Nation community. And the last but not least, if governments interact with us, partner with us, they by default boost their reputation among digital nomads as a more progressive, more trusted entity. So I would encourage you not to miss the opportunity and learn more about our project at the restate.global website, or talk about this after this session with me. If you are guys, some of you digital nomads, I would suggest you fill an application and become one of the first members of our community. If you're representing the governments, I would encourage you to sign up and be the first to experiment with this project. But now, I'd like to show you a small video. I also had a chance a couple of days ago to talk about blockchain, decentralized community, and actually perspective of digital nomads become a global, new global influential power. I had a chance to speak with two brilliant minds, Vitalik Buterin, the co-founder of Ethereum Foundation and one of the most influential person in the technology space, and particularly in decentralized technology and decentralized economy space, and Balaji Srinivasan, who is actually author of interesting book called networkstate.com, where he grounded basic principle of decentralized community and network state, which we use quite a lot when we plan to develop Collaboration Nation. So I hope you enjoy it, because I did. Let's play the video. Balaji, Vitalik, thank you very much for joining our panel discussion at the World Government Summit. What do you think? Are the principles which you, Balaji, described in your book, Network State, if they properly applied, could solve the current pain points and needs of digital nomads? such as lack of global ID, universal public services, and many others?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so the book that you're referring to is at thenetworkstate.com. And one issue with the digital nomad is the same issue with the sovereign individual, which is that it's hard for an individual to be truly sovereign. There's lots of things that are set up by collectives. And if you try to negotiate as an individual, sometimes you can only get so far. So there's a utility of a network union of digital nomads that would advocate for, potentially more liberalized immigration, but not necessarily in the sense of, usually immigration is meant to mean permanent visitation, but at least for visits, like rather than permanent relocation, at least for visits, that should be something that you could build a fairly large coalition around for, tourism, for business travel, for things like that. That shouldn't be that restricted. I can understand people being very selective about who they lend to their country permanently, but temporarily. That's a kind of thing where digital nomads could get together in a network union, write a bunch of articles, and push for liberalization of those laws. Yeah, thanks. Vitalik, let me a little bit take another angle on this question. What do you think? Decentralized organization, some global communities which is based on kind of principle of network states, in general, blockchain solutions. Is it a viable solution to empower fast-growing global community of digital nomads so they can become capable of addressing certain global challenges? Because I think it's not a secret that centralized organizations, global organizations, which the purpose to address certain challenges are not quite efficient and effective. And there is a hope that, community of people who care about certain challenges could be much more effective. What do you think?
Yeah, so first of all, I definitely wanted to really agree with Balaji's point that I think the really key thing that's being discussed right now is this idea that being a digital nomad or just generally, being a world citizen in the 21st century should not be something that you just do as an individual. Like there are benefits from communities, there's benefits from economies of scale, there are benefits from having a group of people that is going to take care of you. If you look at nomading historically, if you look at Mongolian steppe nomad tribes, if you look at other nomad groups that have existed for thousands of years, like most of them, they would not just kind of go around as individuals. They travel in packs, they travel in, sometimes groups of, size 100 to 200, and you'd still have this kind of continuity of community, right? And I think the challenge is like, how can we combine continuity of community and the benefits of, economies of scale and doing things in groups with the freedoms that you get from being able to quickly change your location and be in different locations at different times. And, I think a lot of the digital technologies that we're dealing with can really help there, right? Like we have, the internet and, internet-based social platforms of all kinds for communication. We have, blockchain-based things for collective management of assets, for collective agreements and things like voting. There's other kinds of technologies that are designed around collective discussion and kind of aligning on visions and ideas that most people in the group agree with, and trying to improve on them so that even more people agree with them, right? And these kinds of things are, I think, going to be needed if we want these kinds of communities to work.
I'd like to ask you another question, because you list a lot of good things which digital nomads could benefit from. But what should happen so national governments are ready to embrace global public services like global ID or digital passport or many others? And what's the value for them?
I think it is in the interest of smaller countries, whether we're talking about, Switzerland or, somewhere in the Balkans or, some Southeast Asian nation or places in Africa. Like it's in their interest, I think, to experiment with attracting communities and not just attracting individuals. And I think they have benefits that if they provide them, they could really leverage, right? Cost. Most places have lower cost of living than London, New York City, and the Bay Area. Regulation. They can experiment with better and kind of more open regulatory frameworks. In particular immigration, right? Like a lot of non-Western people have a huge problem just accessing mainstream, industry conferences because they're based in places like the U.S. And honestly, like my experience with U.S. border security is like not very good, and it's like one of the more annoying ones that I've had to access. And most people I've talked to have had similar experiences. And if they're not white Canadians like myself, then it's often even worse for them, right? So the question, like other countries could be in a position to offer more liberalized immigration frameworks, and on the other side, these community organizations are in a good position to say like, hey, this person from this country that you normally don't trust, he's actually part of our group, and we have knowledge to believe that this person is trustworthy. And there could be a kind of different options for the governments to issue visas, not just to individuals, but even to these entire communities at the same time, right? So I think there is a natural kind of coalition between these two sides, and I definitely don't think that this needs to be and entirely a individuals and communities versus governments thing. I think it's exactly the sort of area where there's even a lot of government actors that could be very aligned with more of this kind of community nomading and just intentional community relocation activity taking place.
Should there be crowd-funded territories where digital nomads, global citizens could physically meet, or should it be like collaboration nation or network states, digital virtual states, be fully digital or online?
Yeah, I think obviously I think the digital world is great, but Thiel has this poke, basically like part of his stump speech over the last 10, 15 years, which is a great speech, and it's a great concept. It's really important, where, the thesis is, or the thesis of the world has been, oh, we're in this great time of innovation. And his antithesis is actually, yeah, maybe there's some innovation in bits, but it's not really there in atoms. It's not what it was in the 20th century where the physical world was transformed. Look around you, it looks the same. Look at the same yellow school buses and so on. And then the synthesis, in my view, is Thiel's right, but bits are unlocking or about to unlock innovation in atoms, or can unlock them in different ways. One is obviously your code that scripts the robots, right? Or it moves the Ubers around or what have you. Another, and I think even more important, is what we're doing with crypto and building communities that actually have a spinal column and backbone that's actually cloud first. They're cloud first, land last, but not land never. That's one of the big concepts from the Network State book, is building a strong enough spinal column in the cloud, and then you can have these tendrils poke down in different areas. And rather than be constrained by any one government, which may be holding back self-driving cars or what have you, or regenerative medicine, you can negotiate in parallel with 100 governments on the surface of the earth. And one of them should have somebody, ideally you've got your dual netizens that are doing this, okay? So you've got your Tuvaluans or your Palauans or your Estonians or your Israelis or Indians or Brazilians or what have you, who are part of the network state, but also, of course, part of their local culture, and they know their local laws, and they speak the language, they understand the culture, and they will lobby in a legal way. Their local, they'll advocate, this might be a better term, they're, because they're doing it as a citizen, not as a quote lobbyist, they'll advocate for self-driving. And in this town, they'll say, guess what? I'm part of this community. Or it's kind of like saying my company would invest $100 million if we made this change to the law, right? And if you knock on 100 different doors in parallel in all these different places, and you're publishing the articles and so on, one of them will open and you'll have the El Salvador of self-driving, or you'll have the, Wyoming of, like regenerative medicine, or, you'll get these things, right? The Denmark, or actually I'm not saying, the North Dakota of drones. North Dakota is actually pretty good for drones, okay? And you won't necessarily be able to predict which one it is. But in this fashion, the reason the physical world is still important is we're still physical beings. There's a lot we can do in the cloud. It's an amazingly powerful thing, but we're limited if we have no power on the land.
The reason why we're here is because collaboration is the key to the next century. And I'm interested not just in the technology for collaboration, but how do we create collaborative capacity in the people so that they are ready for the tech. And we've heard a bit about Collaboration Nation, and so now we're going to hear from each of our panelists with their specific expertise as it relates to decentralized organizations in general. So we're going to start with Dr. Haddad. You're one of the world's leading experts on legal transformation. She actually came up with this word, and now people, including this conference, are using it. And she's been creating instruments and techniques to drive forward the change of legal structures. So, Dr. Haddad, for decentralized organizations, what are some of the legal structures that need to happen so that this future becomes possible?
Thank you very much for this question, and thank you very much for having me here. Do you hear me well? Okay, so first of all, the first point is to rethink what law is, to allow ourselves to develop alternatives to the concept of law we do have right now in order to make those decentralized organizations or communities possible at all. So basically, law is just a reflection of our values, and it's a code encoding how we should interact with each other. So the Code Civil, which is the French civil code, is nothing else than a code. So this can be also encoded in a digital way, also on a blockchain, or let it be whatever code you may choose. So to rethink or to think differently and to allow this alternative is very essential in order to make these happen. The other thing I was thinking about, and also it would very much fit with what Vitalik just said, which is the challenge of living in freedom without a local fixed point, but in the same time having the sense of community. And again, this is also something I tell always my like people from the tech world, we don't need to invent everything from scratch. Just look to other cultures, or mainly indigenous people who do live like this. He mentioned tribes. We have a lot of nomadic tribes living here, especially if this country was a nomadic living tribes here in UAE, right? So what we do at the Institute for Legal Transformation, we have a Bedouin DAO project, for example. So what we do, I do spend time with Bedouins who are a nomadic tribe, learn how do they live with each other, how do they interact. They live completely decentralized, but still, in the end, they belong together as a tribe, even single shepherds, but still they belong to several tribes, and also these tribes manage to live with each other. So what are the norms? Again, what are the norms they do have and make it possible to live these decentralized governance and still very, very in alignment with nature and very sustainably? And so the first step we do is research-based analyze how do they do it, which is a social science approach. The second step is to transfer and to translate this into a code for a decentralized organization, which is a DAO, and that's why we call it the Bedouin DAO. This is an example to solve it.
That's fantastic. And so now we're going to go to Mark. Mark, you advise organizations and governments and companies on deep technology. And so can you speak a little bit about, from your experience, how this affects participants? What are the benefits?
Well, I don't know how you feel having watched the presentations, but I started off thinking that digital nomads might be a force for good. I felt that as a community they might help shape nations to become more competitive. That nations that perhaps had moved into an environment in which they lead by control and coercion. You know, put your hand up if you know a nation that leads by control and coercion. For nations that lead by control and coercion, you are in my jurisdiction, you will pay my taxes, you will do as you're told, and you will follow my regulation or else. What incentive do they have to change? And I thought the rise of digital nomads, the few of them, might start to get nations to think differently, but actually with so many of them, they become a threat. They become a threat. Now, I suspect that it's not as big a number as we think, because an American living in America can hardly be. It's that they've moved to Nebraska from Florida, so they were a digital nomad, but they're still in one of the most controlling environments. They're not nomadic in that sense. They still are within one country. So take those numbers back to a smaller number. Actually, what do we see? Well, we see that we get back to a collaborative environment, one in which the citizens, if you will, of the digital nation can start to exert an influence by way of their location. And we can probably see that existing nations will resent this. If I exert my authority through control, I am not going to welcome an organization that exerts their authority through collaboration, because it might be catching. How can I raise taxes in an environment in which the people don't feel they're getting value if somebody can move elsewhere? So I think we are in a pivotal point now where citizens will have to start to choose what they want to do, because you cannot continue to live in a nation that exerts its authority by control and be a digital nomad. It's not going to work, right? So where does this take us? I think where this takes us is this. The younger generation, between 25 and 40, average age was at 34, something like that, that younger generation will think, what ties me to this geography? What links me to this physical geography? Perhaps my family, perhaps my friends. Historically, my assets, my bank account, my house, my flat. And I think what we'll start to see is that people will be looking for jurisdictions where they can establish themselves, their identity and their business, that is not connected to a physical geography. They can set up a company on a satellite in space now, for example. All of us can set up a company on a satellite in space. There is no physical geography on Earth that controls it. And then if I don't have any physical assets, if I live by way of rent, if I keep my only assets in the digital world, I can actually start to float around. And at that point, nations that are willing to embrace the digital nomad will start to attract the significant amount of GDP. They will fight very hard against an existing order that wishes to suppress it. But nevertheless, over time, I think we'll see that transition. But the first thing will be creating an environment in which people can keep their identity and their assets away from the claws of a controlling, coercive, regulatory model. And I don't know if that's your vision, to try and create that environment where people don't need to physically exist in any particular place. Is that the idea? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's very interesting, and I think it's a good segue to His Excellency. So you set up the first embassy in the metaverse, and you think often about the intersection between digital and physical objects and currencies. Can you tell us, what is the opportunity as you see it for countries to really welcome the digital nomads?
In thinking about the spirit of collaboration, I first wish to clarify that the digital embassy being pioneered by Barbados is a government of Barbados project, of which I'm part of, and I'm proud of that. The objective is, how do you build towards the future of where the intersection between the area of government, between the area of blockchain, and between the area of the metaverse can provide a union which looks and drives the form of virtual sovereignty. Within that layer of virtual sovereignty, a government can provide a new type of environment for the digital nomad, and it can participate in the collaboration of these types of ecosystems by driving better systems around accessibility, interaction, integration, and how they treat things like digital rights, where a participant in a foreign nation can have an akin of an e-token or an e-visa, and access a particular area of a virtual embassy, and in doing so have some level of privileges applied to that, that a government's able to execute in the form of being able to control this virtual environment. You see, when you bring blockchain into the equation, you bring a decentralized area where once the government controls a cryptographic key of that, they're able to enact a level of sovereignty. Within the metaverse, once you have an environment that is interactive and a halfway point between the physical world and a website, you change the way at which you integrate and communicate with audience members. And finally, when you have government in that mix, you can start designing laws that aren't just necessarily for the citizenry below that government, but can be applied to a global basis. And as we're moving forward, we can see that the average user's digital rights, the average digital nomad is just not increasing, but so is the value and the content attached to their identity. And now you can have a system of where governments are able to provide a global service for the global citizenry. It's fundamentally an important concept for those digital nomads that still need to reflect to some level of rule of law. And that is possible within a collaborative network state of states.
Great, thank you. So now we're moving into the dinner party, because usually when you see panels, you don't actually get to hear what the panelists, the questions that they have for one another. And so, Mark, if you would ask Dr. Haddad the question that you have.
Yes, absolutely. So, whilst I think we can all see many disadvantages of centralized, coercive, control-based governance, there are also one or two advantages, one of which is that there is a body that enforces the laws, the norms within that society. It might be the courts, for example. Now, if we were to move to a digital environment, what body would operate to enforce the laws, the contracts that exist when state bodies would have no authority over the individual nodes of the, of the environment they live in? How do we enforce laws in a decentralized world, I suppose, is the question.
Oh, you see how I smile? I love this question. Because this is exactly what we try to figure out at the Institute for Legal Transformation, because we say that just having good regulation, good sounding regulation doesn't get us anywhere. The enforcement is the most important. So law without enforcement is a teethless tiger. So you don't need it at all. So what I think, if we move to decentralization, if we might move, then there's a complicated answer, but there's a very easy answer also, and I will just give you the easy answer and don't bother you with the very complicated answer. It's just the smart contracts. And the governments, quite easy, they don't need to be reactive as they are right now by we set up a law, we set up a law by the government or by the parliament or whatever, and then we start implementing it. It's, again, we need a mindset shift. It's how can we set rules and set up the implementation of these rules in advance via a smart contract, which then implements itself. So we didn't figure out right now how exactly to do it, but we have some ideas on particular cases we can do. But this is quite easy for a government to do, a decentralized, or even organization or a centralized organization, using blockchain technology, especially smart contracts, to decide in advance how it should be ruled. So for example, in criminal law, we would not need jails at all, because you just need technical tools to instead of punishment. We don't use punishment at all. Like, we envision not having punishment, but to avoid specific criminal actions, or like basically you can my English, sorry, you can avoid someone doing criminal actions via this technology, via the blockchain technology from the very beginning. So it's just take a look at the technology, and there's so much possible when it comes to implementation.
I love the simplicity of that. And so
complicated would be too complicated.
No, it's great. And so, Dr. Haddad, if you would ask Gabriel your question, or His Excellency,
I'm really excited to ask.
Countries.
I have many questions for you, and especially like for sure for the metaverse. But one thing is, you talk about the metaverse as it's being decentralized and collaborative by definition. So what you're talking about is mainly Web3, right? Or metaverse is part of Web3. So how?
I can clarify.
Excuse me?
I can clarify.
No, it's fine. The question is following. So how do you avoid certain kind of governments using the opposite, which is centralized blockchain, or non-decentralized, which is closed blockchain, in order to do the completely opposite with what you were talking about, which is, for example, implementing a digital ID and implementing all the social credits or whatever around this, and then taking the freedom from the people. So the technology you're talking about can be amazing, but used in a wrong way. So how did you thought about that, and do you have a solution for me, please?
Definitely, but I first want to clarify that there is a fundamental difference between decentralization and the metaverse. And I'm sorry for drawing the alignment that there were two and the same. Decentralization refers to the idea that there's no central party in control. The metaverse refers to the idea that there's a virtual environment that's fully immersive. The reason I speak towards a decentralized metaverse is those two technologies coming together, like we've seen in the case of Somnium Space, Decentraland, Sandbox, etc. These are immersive experiences where the environment is controlled in a way that no central authority, actor, individual, or government has a right over another.
You wouldn't do the embassy on Meta, for example, for sure.
The problem with that is the government would not have sovereign control over it, because a third-party private organization in a potentially foreign country, unless you were a United States government, could disrupt your services. And by the definition of sovereignty, you cannot enact supreme control over that environment. Whereas in a decentralized space, you have full sovereign control by controlling the cryptographic keys. And the reason why that's fundamentally important is because it instills the rights of not just the sovereign individual, but the sovereign government. So that's the clarity I wanted to give. What was the second part of your question?
To avoid how digital IDs on a blockchain, if it's not decentralized, used against the people, not for the people.
Now, this is a question that's up to the individual sovereign government. Whatever they deem necessary for the advancement of their government and the implementation choices that they make is entirely them. I could only speak on the choices made on behalf of the government of Barbados, which was to use a decentralized environment to enable this type of futuristic lookout post for where our people need to go, where our government needs to go, and ultimately where we think the world needs to go. Because of the amount of advantages this type of new immersive experience meeting government, meeting blockchain, coming together creates an interesting union, as I've stated, of a digital sovereign environment.
Congratulations.
And the field gets very fun from there for governments and what they're able to do for their people, but again, the global basis of people as well.
Great, thank you. And so now, Your Excellency, your question for Mark.
Your position that that the authoritarian governments, or some notion of an authoritarian government, might hamper the idea of a digital nomad. I believe that it's up to the citizenry to encourage their government in a direction that's better for the majority. And my question to you would be, do you ever imagine a country like the United States, for example, heading in this direction where they accept the network state, collaboration nations, and the notion of a digital nomad being someone that truly is boundless?
No, absolutely not. And nor do I see many of the Western economies which have become dependent on control as a method of exacting taxation. Why would they accept it? Why would your nation, for example, accept to become an immediate digital democracy where every citizen can vote on every matter before Parliament, which is the natural extension of a digital democracy, right? Why not? Because that presents its own control-related challenges, not in a negative way, just it's too fast, it's too much. When the SEC said they wanted to get involved with Libra, it killed the project, right? They changed the name to DM and it's dead. China's struggling with DCEP, right? Because it's got to use the banks. It's got to use the banks in order to distribute the digital currency. And it's a struggle, which is why it hasn't been issued for the last couple of years. You know, the UK said it might have a digital currency by 2030, 2040, because the concept of putting monetary policy alone into a decentralized environment is absolutely terrifying. And I think if we were to go around the world and say to citizens in most countries, are you getting value for what you contribute to your country? The answer in most countries would be no.
I have a follow-on question.
Well, if I just finish that point, Ambassador. So if the answer to that is no, how will the country get back to a position where a digital nomad says, I want to be located in that environment? How do they become like the UAE, which, as we say, is very much at the heart of attracting people? Sheikh Mohammed told a lovely story that when he was young, Mohammed bin Rashid, he told a lovely story that when he was young, in the garden was a tree. And as a boy, he watched the tree and he saw local birds living around the tree. There was water nearby and the birds lived in the tree. And in the winter time, birds flew in from abroad. You know, foreign birds were migrating. And they would also land in the tree. And some flew on and some stayed. And in that sense, he said, you know, part of his vision for shaping Dubai as a welcoming environment in which people could come, some would stay and thrive, some would use Dubai as a leaping point to elsewhere. It was a mindset about attracting and retaining value and talent here. And therefore, you know, it's been a very different environment here. But for many nation states, they're not at that point. They've got to almost, the wall that's been built to keep people out is now a wall that's been built to keep people in to pay tax.
Mark, so, I think we should
follow up.
Transition so you can.
My follow-up question would be, let's play with the idea of something that was introduced by early philosophers like Aristotle. Since we're talking about the nation state, network states, he proposed a notion called a polity, which was a sixth form of governance of people. And in a polity, it's the idea of where the all rule the all. As you said, a liquid government. And you said it's just not possible today, but since we're discussing the future of where things are going, and we're now seeing all state resources, all state assets, all state processes within a government moving towards a digitized manner, could it not be envisioned within 10, 20, 30 years that when you do get to a fully encompassing digital government, that there might be a system of everyone voting on everything, a system of where the all rule the all?
Well, I mean, Socrates also said, if you don't like the system you're in, move. And that's what I like about this concept, right? Which is the nation state can say, we will impose whatever tax we want on you. And historically, because our assets are in that country, we can't just say, hey, let's take our house and all our belongings and move next door. We've almost been locked into the zone, and we're not anymore. We're not locked in. And so to your point, do I see governments becoming true digital democracies? Absolutely not. It's absolutely not in their interest to do it. Do I see citizens start to say, I am going to forum shop for the government that I wish to supervise me, Yes, I do. I do think that generation, that younger generation, will say, "Hang on a minute. I don't need to be bound like my parents into a nation that just extracts as much blood as they can. I'm simply going to go to somewhere that does extract some blood, but I actually get some benefit in return." And that's why I really am excited by the concept of getting governments to sign up to say, we don't want to attract the classical FDI of unsustainable investment from another nation state to extract resource, or to do, to create dirty manufacturing because they don't want it at home. We're actually looking to attract FDI, which is the talent and wealth of individuals who have the choice to move. And we want to attract them to us, and we want to retain them here. How do we do that? We create this environment to be the best environment we can to attract and retain them. And if another nation says, oh, we can make it a better environment, we start to set up that competitive environment for the citizen. That's really exciting. But I would say to you, Ambassador, do you see nations wanting to do that?
We're almost out of time, so we're at the third stage, which is 30 seconds, 10 years from now. What do you see? So future trends, 30 seconds, starting. Dr. Haddad, what is your vision for the future with seeing the things that you've described take place? What can we all hope for?
I don't know what you hope for, but what I hope for is that we will have different concepts, which what we call parties now. In a national state, we will have, it can be transnational or trans-border concept we can vote on, again, on a smart contract, and then which will implement himself. So I don't vote for a party or for a person or for a philosophy. I vote for a certain smart contract where I know it will be implemented. Because what happens now in democracies, they tell us stories, we vote for them, and they can't implement it because of 1, 2, 3. So because it's like because it's decentralized and because you can, everyone can read the code, you will see if it's manageable and if it's doable or not, and then you can vote what you think is most manageable and what you think is more likely, according to the future you want to have. Great. So I think, and then by a click.
Thank you. Okay, Mark, 30 seconds. 10 years from now, what happens?
I think a significant number of people will have no physical assets or presence in any one jurisdiction, but they will have housed their identity and their wealth in a jurisdiction, be it a satellite in space, my example, or be it in a different nation. And they will then almost offer themselves to nation states and say, who is going to offer me the best environment for me to bring my wealth in order for you to extract a little bit of blood in return for my presence in your country? And I think nation states that are visionary will start competing for that talent. As we compete for talent in the job market, countries will start competing for talent and wealth in the sort of human citizenry environment.
And finally, Your Excellency, 10 years from now, what happens?
I do see what everyone else sees. And in addition to that, I think we would see a new definition around economic substance. One where if you're using a different type of input-output system, such as a headset for the metaverse, and this is a fully immersive environment in a decentralized world, I suspect that you would have a level of provability in these environments of participation. And as such, it's going to change the rules on how board meetings are conducted remotely, how people present attestations, how legal participation and identity validation happens in the form of communication and interacting. And I suspect that's where we're heading within the next 10 years.
Great. And for me, I see a future where Humans are fundamentally changed by the technology that we use. And so with the tools of Collaboration Nation, with the tools that we've described, DAOs, blockchain, and digital, all the tools that come with setting up digital nomadity, I believe that we will have a greater collaborative capacity, and that will show up in every part of our lives. So that's it. Thank you, everybody, for your time and your attention, and we really appreciate your interest in this topic.